The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, and I pushed the door open to the home I had worked 5 years to afford. The sunlight filtered through the front windows, falling on the oak floors I had painstakingly sanded and refinished myself. I set down my bag and took a slow, deliberate walk through the living room, my fingers brushing the newly painted moldings and the vintage light fixture I'd hunted for months. Every corner of this house bore the evidence of my efforts, and for a moment, I let myself feel the full weight of accomplishment. 5 years of side projects, late nights at the office, and weekend renovations had brought me here. I remembered long evenings scouring hardware stores, measuring, sanding, painting, and dreaming of this day when I could finally step back and call it mine. I thought of Brandon, my younger brother, whose milestones had always seemed to take precedence with our parents, and a small spark of resentment surfaced. Mom had rolled her eyes when I mentioned looking at this neighborhood. Dad had worried aloud about my budget, and Brandon had gotten a congratulatory pat for his college apartment. But this time, the validation I sought would come from the space itself, from the evidence of my own hands and perseverance. I crossed the threshold into the kitchen, the smell of freshly cleaned cabinets mingling with the faint scent of polish still lingering from my morning work. I ran my hand across the countertop and let my eyes linger on the space where the dining table would stand, the place settings for the housewarming already waiting in my mind. This house was more than walls and floors. It was a testament to years of discipline, patience, and sacrifice. The thrill of anticipation settled over me, equal parts pride and nerves, as I began imagining the moment when the first guests would arrive. I set down my keys and stepped fully inside, taking a deep breath. Today, everything I had worked for would finally start to feel real. I spent the morning arranging the dining table with careful precision, placing each plate and crystal glass exactly where I wanted them. The vintage china, collected over months from estate sales and antique shops, gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the windows. I set out the silverware, polished to a shine, and placed fresh flowers in the centerpieces, adjusting each bloom until it sat just right. The scent of the flowers mingled with the faint aroma of the wooden floors I had labored over for weeks, a quiet reminder of the effort that had gone into making this house a home. Next, I turned to the kitchen, preparing appetizers with the preferences of each family member in mind. I rolled out homemade dough for small tarts, chopped vegetables for fresh dips, and uncorked bottles of wine I knew my parents liked. Each movement felt deliberate, almost ritualistic, a tangible expression of the pride and care I had invested in this space. I moved between the rooms, imagining the reactions of those who would soon walk through the front door, envisioning their faces as they noticed the little details I had labored over so carefully. As I worked, my mind drifted to the sacrifices that had brought me here. 5 years of late nights at my data analyst job, weekends spent on side projects and renovations, months of living in cramped, rented apartments while saving every extra dollar every one of those hours had led to this moment. I thought about the careful budgeting, the learning curves, and the countless mistakes I had made while figuring out plumbing, wiring, and painting techniques. Yet despite the pride swelling in my chest, a knot of tension lingered. I had invited my family, hoping for recognition, hoping that the sight of this house would make them understand all I had endured. I imagined their reactions, but uncertainty gnawed at me. Would they appreciate the effort, or would they dismiss it like so many of my past achievements? I stepped back from the kitchen island, wiping my hands on a towel, and surveyed the space. Every detail was exactly as I envisioned. The house was ready. Now, all that remained was to wait for the guests to arrive, and for the moment when the anticipation would meet reality. The invitations had gone out weeks ago, each one carefully addressed and hand-signed, nestled in envelopes sealed with wax. I had spent an evening choosing the paper, the font, and the wording, so that it felt personal yet celebratory. Friends, neighbors, coworkers, and family members were all invited. Each time I dropped an envelope into the mailbox, I felt a small surge of hope, a sense that this day could finally be different, that maybe, just maybe, my family would acknowledge the years I had poured into this house, into making a life that I could be proud of. But even as I worked on the preparations, a shadow of doubt lingered. I couldn't ignore the patterns that had defined my family for as long as I could remember. Every accomplishment of mine had seemed to fade into the background, while Brandon's milestones, sometimes minor or exaggerated, were celebrated with grandeur. Scholarships, promotions, even simple personal victories had often gone unnoticed or were overshadowed by his successes. It had been a subtle, constant message his achievements mattered more. His happiness deserved more attention, while mine was something to observe from the sidelines. Even as I acknowledged these patterns, I tried to quiet the familiar anxiety gnawing at my chest. A few of the RSVPs had come back with vague apologies or notes that hinted at busy schedules. My parents had sent brief replies, neither confirming nor denying attendance. The uncertainty twisted inside me, a reminder of past disappointments when I had hoped for celebration, only to find indifference. I shared these thoughts with Rachel over coffee that morning, her voice calm and steady. "You've done everything right," she said. "The house is beautiful, the invitations are out, but try not to attach your happiness to their response. Sometimes people disappoint, and it isn't a reflection of your worth." Her words settled like a warm blanket over my anxieties, but the lingering tension remained. I went through the list of guests again, checking addresses, phone numbers, and social media confirmations. Each name reminded me of moments past laughs, small victories, shared experiences, but also of the inevitable comparison with Brandon. I tried to focus on what I could control: the house, the food, the environment, the celebration itself. Still, the question lingered in the quiet of the living room as I stepped back to admire the carefully arranged table and polished floors. Would they come this time, or would I be left celebrating alone? My efforts unnoticed by those I had longed to impress most. By 2 o'clock, the house was buzzing with the arrival of friends and neighbors. Rachel was the first to pull into the driveway, a bright smile lighting up her face as she hopped out of the car, carrying a bottle of wine. Not long after, Jane and Peter from work arrived, their arms full of homemade pies and trays of appetizers. Mrs. Eleanor, my elderly neighbor who had always offered guidance on everything from gardening to life decisions, appeared next, balancing a covered dish with the careful precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Despite the cheerful atmosphere, a part of me kept glancing at the empty spaces, the chairs I had set for my family. My phone vibrated repeatedly, a small hope that maybe someone had just been delayed, only to be met with silence and unanswered texts. The absence of my parents and Brandon gnawed at the edge of my excitement, a quiet sting under the laughter and conversation filling the house. I tried to focus on the people who were actually there, letting their presence anchor me. Rachel flitted between guests, making introductions and easing tension, while Mrs. Eleanor shared stories from her own life, her voice calm and reassuring. I realized how lucky I was to have a circle of people who cared about me, who showed up not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted to be part of this day. The first hour passed in a blur of smiles, laughter, and shared memories. Each time I caught a glance of the empty chairs meant for family, the weight in my chest reminded me of old patterns and past disappointments. But the warmth of my chosen family, the friends and neighbors who had consistently been there, was a reminder that validation and support didn't always come from blood. As the appetizers were cleared and glasses refilled, I settled into the rhythm of the celebration, letting the presence of those who truly cared guide the tone of the day. I had just poured myself a glass of wine when my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with notifications from social media, and my stomach sank, hesitating for a moment. I opened the app, half hoping it was a delayed congratulatory message from a relative finally arriving. Instead, What I saw made my heart tighten. There they were, my parents, smiling broadly beside Brandon in a series of photos that gleamed with staged perfection. The captions read, "So proud of our boy's new home and celebrating Brandon's first big milestone." A video auto-played next, Brandon laughing with a few cousins, showing off a living room that looked almost like mine, polished and styled, but too perfect to be real. My fingers shook as I scrolled through the posts, each frame a reminder that this wasn't just a celebration, it was a carefully crafted spectacle, designed to overshadow the day I had worked for years to make my own. The realization hit me slowly at first. Then, with an unbearable weight, Brandon's apartment wasn't even purchased. It was rented, staged for social media, and my parents had helped orchestrate the illusion. The hurt I had felt earlier in the afternoon deepened into a raw, simmering anger. 5 years of sacrifices, of scraping together every extra dollar, of hours spent sanding, painting, and restoring a house that had been empty and worn for decades. It all seemed invisible in comparison to this fake achievement paraded online. My parents and brother had deliberately chosen this moment to assert control, to make their celebration louder than mine, to ensure that my day, my housewarming, would be dwarfed by their fabrication. I paced the living room, glancing at the empty chairs that were still set for my family, their absence now a symbol of the deceit. The friends around me offered gentle words and encouragement, but they couldn't shield me from the sting of betrayal. Every laugh and cheer in the video from my family's event felt like a deliberate slap across the pride I had been nurturing all morning. Rage and frustration coursed through me, but beneath it was a quiet, cold resolve. This was no longer just disappointment. It was a defining moment. I could choose to let it crush me, or I could take control, confront the deception, and reclaim the significance of my own achievement. I sank into the couch, staring at the polished oak floors, letting the hurt and anger settle around me. Memories surfaced unbidden, each one a reminder of the patterns that had defined my life. I remembered the scholarship award I had received in high school, how I had called home excitedly, only to have my parents distracted by Brandon's minor accomplishments. The ceremony photos hung on the wall of my mind, yet no one from my family had attended. I had celebrated alone, internalizing the lesson that my successes were somehow less worthy. College was no different. Every time I made the honor roll, received a promotion, or moved into a new apartment, Brandon's milestones loomed larger. My parents were always there for him, co-signing loans, providing furniture, offering advice while my accomplishments were met with tepid congratulations, followed by reminders of budgeting concerns or neighborhood risks. Even my 5 years of painstaking saving and renovation work, every late night spent balancing multiple jobs, had been quietly questioned rather than celebrated. The pattern of favoritism, repeated for decades, was clear now. Each slight, each dismissal had shaped my expectations, my self-doubt, and my need for validation. Recognizing it brought a strange mixture of anger and clarity. It wasn't just today or Brandon's celebration, it was the accumulation of years of manipulation and neglect, small gestures and omissions adding up to a life spent proving my worth to the wrong people. Sitting there, I let myself feel it fully, the frustration, the grief, the quiet determination that had been simmering for years. Understanding the past didn't erase the hurt, but it illuminated the path forward. I realized that reclaiming my pride and autonomy depended on acknowledging these patterns and refusing to let them dictate my present. I dialed my parents' number with trembling fingers, bracing myself for the familiar mixture of defensiveness and dismissal. The phone rang twice before my mother picked up, her voice bright and casual. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. I explained calmly that I was aware of the housewarming mix-up, that I had sent invitations weeks ago, and that I would not apologize for expecting respect or acknowledgement of the work I had put into my home. There was a pause, sharp and tense, followed by a defensive rebuttal. My mother insisted that Brandon had only recently decided on his own gathering, that it was a small celebration, and that I should understand. I felt a surge of frustration but refused to back down. I reminded her of the years of favoritism, the countless times my achievements had been minimized while Brandon's minor successes were celebrated. My voice grew steadier with each word, fueled by the pent-up resentment of decades. My father's voice joined in, a mixture of irritation and disbelief, claiming that I was being dramatic, that family should stick together and not make issues out of celebrations. I held firm, speaking clearly about the sacrifices I had made, the long hours spent renovating the house, the financial planning and emotional investment. I made it undeniable this home was mine, and my pride in it was not negotiable. By the end of the conversation, there was no victory for them, only silence, punctuated by my own calm, resolute breathing. I had said everything I needed to say, standing firm in my truth and asserting boundaries I had avoided for years. I hung up and felt an unexpected lightness, a release from carrying the weight of others' approval. For the first time, my achievements belonged entirely to me, untainted by the shadow of family favoritism. The afternoon settled into a rhythm of laughter, conversation, and clinking glasses. Rachel moved seamlessly among the guests, introducing friends to neighbors and keeping the energy light. Jane and Peter shared stories from work, and Mrs. Eleanor recounted her clever tips for gardening and decorating, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had lived fully and kindly. I found myself smiling, genuinely, as the room filled with people who were present because they wanted to be. Each laugh, each shared anecdote, reminded me that my worth didn't have to be measured by the attention of my parents or Brandon. The house hummed with warmth, every corner alive with appreciation and care. It was a relief to feel my achievements recognized by those who could see the effort, the dedication, and the passion that had gone into creating this space. As I moved from the kitchen to the dining room, adjusting a centerpiece here and nudging a chair there, I felt a subtle shift inside me. The empty chairs that had once symbolized absence and disappointment no longer carried the same weight. I realized that family wasn't just defined by blood. Family could be the people who chose to show up, who celebrated alongside you, who supported you without expectation. These were the people who truly mattered. The laughter and chatter around me reinforced a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in years. I was surrounded by validation and care. And for the first time that day, the sting of betrayal softened, replaced by gratitude and pride. I paused for a moment by the window, watching the sunlight glint off the polished floors, and let myself absorb the joy and warmth in the room. This celebration, with the people who had chosen to be here, was real, and it belonged entirely to me. The following weeks settled into a comforting routine, one I shaped deliberately. Sunday evenings became a tradition with Rachel, Jane, Peter, and Mrs. Eleanor. We shared meals, stories, and laughter. And slowly, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Each gathering reinforced the idea that family could be chosen, not inherited, and that presence, care, and attention mattered more than the names on the invitation. I maintained contact with my parents, but on my terms. Phone calls were brief and direct, updates shared without inviting judgment or criticism. I no longer waited for their approval, no longer measured my successes against their expectations. Brandon reached out occasionally, seeking advice or support, but I had learned to respond carefully, maintaining boundaries while protecting my emotional energy. Work became another space of fulfillment. I mentored Alexis, a young engineer navigating her first big project, offering guidance and encouragement without the interference or judgment that had plagued my own early career. Watching her gain confidence and independence reminded me of my own journey and the importance of surrounding oneself with people who saw potential rather than limitations. The house, once just a project, became a home. The polished floors, carefully restored woodwork, and sunlit rooms were no longer symbols of struggle but of achievement, of the life I had built with my own hands. Laughter echoed in spaces that had previously felt heavy with expectation and absence. And each evening I felt a quiet pride that needed no external validation. Evenings often ended with simple pleasures, Rachel and I lingering over tea, Peter strumming his guitar in the living room, Mrs. Eleanor sharing gardening tips that became small lessons in patience and care. These moments, small and deliberate, reminded me that joy could be cultivated and that support could be sought and given intentionally. I moved through my days with a growing sense of autonomy, confidence, and self-respect. Each interaction, each small ritual, reinforced that my happiness was not contingent on the approval of those who had long dismissed it. I stood in the middle of the living room, letting my eyes sweep across the space that had been months in the making. Every polished floorboard, every carefully hung fixture, every bloom in the vases on the dining table was a testament to my perseverance, my independence, and the countless hours I had spent making this house into a home. It was more than walls and wood. It was proof of what I could accomplish when I relied on my own determination and the support of those who truly cared. The laughter and chatter of friends and neighbors filled the house, blending with the soft clink of glasses and the faint aroma of freshly baked pastries. Rachel flitted between guests, keeping spirits high, while Mrs. Eleanor moved gracefully through the rooms, her approving smile reminding me of the quiet wisdom and encouragement that had always buoyed me. The energy in the house felt alive, vibrant, and entirely mine, untainted by the shadow of absent family members. My father appeared briefly at the doorway, a small smile breaking through the usual stoicism. "You did all this yourself," he said quietly, his eyes taking in the polished floors and the sunlit kitchen. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without seeking praise or validation beyond the simple truth. My mother remained distant, her presence more a reminder of old patterns than a source of approval, and I let her be. I didn't need her recognition to feel accomplished. The room around me was filled with people who had chosen to be present, who had celebrated alongside me without expectation or judgment. In their company, I felt the weight of years of neglect lift, replaced by pride, contentment, and a deep sense of belonging. My home had become more than a space. It had become a sanctuary, a place where support, care, and genuine connection defined the atmosphere. As the evening drew to a close, I stepped onto the porch and breathed in the crisp Portland air, knowing that this house, this life I had built, was fully and completely mine.